3 banks fail with Trump-era deregulation deemed a key culprit. Al Gore says Biden okay of Willow is recklessly irresponsible. Pence says history will hold Trump accountable for January 6th. The United Nations observes the first International Day Against Islamophobia. Over 100 arrested in Iran over serial poisoning of schoolgirls. Anti-government protests resume in Israel for the 10th week. Saudi Aramco posts largest ever annual profit. Malala Yousafzai tells Kimmel she only talks about peace. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight, President Biden is assuring the world that the United States banking system is safe. This is after 3 banks closed their doors last week. On Sunday, the Biden administration guaranteed the funds to restore confidence. Silvergate Bank voluntarily closed on Wednesday. Then the government shut down Silicon Valley Bank, followed by its rival, Signature Bank. In the wake of the closures, debate has begun about why the banks failed. Senator Elizabeth Warren said it was due to a decision made by former President Donald Trump and congressional Republicans to roll back regulations which contributed to the collapse. The Biden administration has approved a major and controversial oil drilling plan in Alaska known as Willow. Critics from climate campaigners on TikTok to former Vice President Al Gore were pressuring Biden to block the multi-billion-dollar oil project in Alaska. The 30-year development in the National Petroleum Reserve would produce up to 180,000 barrels of oil a day. It would release over 9.2 metric tons of planet-heating carbon dioxide annually. On Friday, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre denied reports that Biden would imminently approve the Willow project, but it has now approved the controversial oil drilling plan. Former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence says history will hold ex-President Donald Trump accountable for the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. President Trump was wrong, Pence says at the annual Gridiron Dinner, a white tie event attended by journalists and politicians in Washington, D.C. I had no right to overturn the election, and his reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol that day, he further says, as reported by the Washington Post. Trump has long denied the validity of the 2020 election, which he lost by some 7 million votes, claiming rampant fraud. But he has not put forth any evidence to substantiate his claims. His claims were rejected by his Attorney General, William Barr. The January 6 attack marked the first time the Capitol had been occupied since the British forces torched it during the War of 1812. The Pentagon is helping to shield Russia from International Criminal Court accountability for its atrocities in Ukraine. The New York Times reports that United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin III and other Pentagon brass are blocking sharing evidence of Russian war crimes in Ukraine with the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. This evidence was gathered by the United States intelligence agencies in Ukraine. The Times said the U.S. fears such a reckoning could set a precedent that would allow the tribunal to prosecute U.S. for war crimes. Russia, the United States, and Ukraine are not a party to the Rome Statute, the treaty governing the ICC. American troops and contractors have perpetrated war crimes in U.S. attacks, invasions, occupations, and peacekeeping operations in the years since the ICC's establishment in 1998. A story on how the United Nations observes its first International Day Against Islamophobia comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. The United Nations on Friday commemorated the first ever International Day to Combat Islamophobia with a special event in the General Assembly Hall. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told attendees the growing hate that Muslims face is not isolated development. He added that discrimination diminishes us all. It is incumbent on all of us to stand up against it. We must never be bystanders to bigotry. Guterres highlighted UN measures such as a plan of action to safeguard religious sites. He also called for ramping up political, cultural, and economic investments in social cohesion. The UN speakers upheld the need for concrete action in the face of rising hatred, discrimination, and violence against Muslims. The observation follows the unanimous adoption of an Assembly resolution last year that proclaimed 15th of March as in the International Day. It called for global dialogue that promotes tolerance, peace, and respect for human rights and religious diversity. The high-level event was co-convened by Pakistan, whose Foreign Minister Bilal Bhutto Zardari underlined that Islam is a religion of peace, tolerance, and pluralism. Sweden has launched new European Union talks on combating racism and anti-Semitism. But it will not discuss Islamophobia. This is according to the EU Observer, a Brussels-based online newspaper. This has prompted accusations of tackling the problems with a right-wing approach. The alarming rise in racist and anti-Semitic incidents in the EU member states is deplorable, the Swedish EU presidency stated in a memo addressed to EU ambassadors. The Swedish briefing note mentioned that anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life several times, but made no mention of Islamophobia or Muslim life. For member states, they are free to discuss anti-Muslim hatred under the racism bracket. But in practice, discussions of racism in EU circles tend to focus on the 15 million or so Black Europeans and Europeans of African descent. The 1.3 million Jewish people estimated to be living in Europe are also protected, along with LGBTQI people, Roma people, and disabled EU citizens. But Europe's 25 million Muslims have next to nothing, despite facing similar types of discrimination and spiraling levels of hate crime. More than 100 people have been arrested in Iran in connection with the serial poisoning of schoolgirls, the Interior Ministry said on Saturday. At least 1,200 schoolgirls have been admitted to hospitals in recent months after they complained of severe poisoning-related symptoms. In a statement, the ministry said over 100 people were identified, arrested, and investigated in several cities. It referred to possible links with the Mujahideen-i-Khalq organization, an Iranian opposition group based in Albania. Tens of thousands of Israelis took to the streets Saturday for the 10th week in a row. This was to protest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing policies and a plan that would restrict the powers of the judiciary. Israelis have held demonstrations every Saturday against the judicial regulation of the extreme right-wing coalition government led by Netanyahu. They were on the streets once again last weekend in dozens of cities, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, and West Jerusalem. Representatives from different NGOs made pro-democracy speeches on a stage set up in Tel Aviv's Kaplan Square near the government complex. Demonstrators also chanted slogans against Netanyahu, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. Purposed by Justice Minister Yair Levin, the reform plan, if enacted, would be the most radical change ever in the system of government in Israel. It would severely limit the power of the Supreme Court of Justice. Netanyahu, who is on trial for corruption, has insisted his plan would enhance democracy. The United Kingdom announced a new $6.31 million funding package Friday for persecuted Rohingya living in Bangladesh. It also made a commitment to push for a long-term solution to enable their return to Burma. Bangladesh is currently hosting more than 1.2 million Rohingya in 33 squalid refugee camps in the southern border district of Cox's Bazar. They fled a genocide at the hands of the Burmese military in August 2017. For over 5 years, the UK has provided over $400 million to support Rohingya and the Bangladeshi host communities. On Friday, Human Rights Watch announced that Bahrain had revoked visas issued to the group to attend an international parliamentary conference. The group said the move came on March 8th, just days after raising concerns about the Gulf state's rights record. The country hosted the 146th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union, or the IPU, last weekend. The IPU's motto is "For Democracy, for Everyone." A public service video with an Uyghur actor portraying a drug dealer who preys on Chinese women recently went viral in China. The 90-second video gained nearly 2 million likes within a day of its release on February 8th, according to an article by Chinese media analyst Manya Kutz. In the spot, Uyghur actor Derhonjan Mehmet says to the camera from a dimly lit room, "I'm a black-hearted drug dealer, but I'd never tell you this." He is then shown giving the drug posed as candy to an apparently Han Chinese woman in a coffee shop. Researchers and activists have criticized the choice of an Uyghur for the role of the drug dealer. They say it plays on old racist tropes about Uyghur men who have historically been victims of drug trafficking rather than perpetrators. Saudi Aramco announced on Sunday that it brought in a staggering $161.1 billion in profits last year. The company's profit figure for 2022 is the largest ever recorded by an oil corporation. Amnesty International criticized the company and its surplus, saying that it amassed during a global cost of living crisis. Saudi Arabia is the second largest oil producer in the world, behind the United States. Aramco is an oil giant almost entirely owned by the government of Saudi Arabia. It joined other fossil fuel companies in capitalizing on energy market turmoil sparked by Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. Amin Nasser, Aramco's CEO, declared on an earnings call that this is probably the highest net income ever recorded in the corporate world. For comparison, ExxonMobil, the second largest oil company in the world behind Aramco, reported $56 billion in net income last year. It was a record for the U.S. firm, but nowhere close to the Saudi corporation's windfall. The host of this year's Oscars, Jimmy Kimmel, is being criticized for how he handled an interaction with Malala Yousafzai. Yousafzai is a Nobel Peace Laureate and producer who attended the award ceremony. Kimmel asked Yousafzai, did Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine during the Venice Film Festival premiere of Don't Worry, Darling? He was referring to an incident which actor Chris Pine said did not happen last year at the Venice Film Festival, according to Variety magazine. Yousafzai, without missing a beat, simply replied, "I only talk about peace." Kimmel responded with, "That's why you're Malala. That's a great answer." Fans on social media slammed Kimmel. One said the interaction with Yousafzai was one of the worst and most painful things that they had seen on TV in so many years. Another wrote that watching the Oscars from home, I was absolutely horrified with the interaction between Jimmy Kimmel and Malala. Jimmy, you were incredibly disrespectful. One fan said, Jimmy Kimmel is a national disgrace. And that's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.